The White House this afternoon offered a blistering condemnation of statements by two members of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's governing coalition. Both Israeli Minister of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir and Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich in recent days have publicly pushed the idea of forcing Palestinians to leave Gaza forever. Smotrich said this on Israel Army radio, quote, "We will not allow a situation in which 2 million people live there," meaning Palestinians. "If there are 100,000 to 200,000 Arabs living in Gaza, the discussion about the day after the war will be completely different. I'm for completely changing the reality in Gaza, having a conversation about settlements, Israeli settlements, in the Gaza Strip. We'll need to rule there for a long time." A proposition that the leader of the Reform Jewish movement in the United States, Rabbi Rick Jacobs, called ethnic cleansing, and what the U.S. State Department called inflammatory and irresponsible. At today's White House briefing, here is what National Security Council spokesman John Kirby had to say.
That statement does speak for the United States government and for this administration in terms of our complete refusal and rebuke of any forced displacement outside of Gaza of any Palestinians. We have made that clear to our Israeli counterparts in private sessions. We certainly have made that publicly, and that's not going to change.
Kirby standing by the statement from the State Department there, condemning what Smotrich and Ben-Gvir have said. Prime Minister Netanyahu, however, has not condemned the two ministers for their incendiary comments. As we have covered before, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich are two extremist, anti-Arab bigots. Each of them controls 7 seats in the Israeli parliament, or Knesset, where Netanyahu's government has 64 seats out of 120. So Netanyahu crosses those two at the risk of his own survival as prime minister. Since the October 7th attacks by Hamas, Ben-Gvir, who until recently had a portrait in his living room of a murderous Jewish terrorist, he's been making life even more difficult for Arab and Muslim citizens of Israel, handing out guns to Jewish citizen militias. Smotrich currently has broad powers over civilian issues in the West Bank, where more than 300 Palestinians have been killed in clashes with Israelis, many of them extremist settlers, just since October 7th. After Netanyahu formed his government just over a year ago, I asked him about these two extremists in his government.
Smotrich just called himself a fascist homophobe. He suggested same-sex marriage is like incest. The former deputy director of Shin Bet said he was a Jewish terrorist, that he tried to stage an event when the Gaza pullout was going on. And the other day he was saying that he was putting out these horrible conspiracy theories, you must have seen this, about the Shin Bet and the assassination of Rabin. I mean, these seem like rather extreme individuals.
Yeah, well, a lot of people say a lot of things when they're not in power, and they sort of temper themselves when they get into power. And that's certainly the case here.
Perhaps that was wishful thinking, because neither Ben-Gvir nor Smotrich has tempered themselves at all. Critics accuse both Ben-Gvir and Smotrich of fomenting settler violence against innocent Palestinians in the West Bank. And matters are currently getting worse, with West Bank security officials not even being paid. Now, this is because of what are called clearance revenues. These are the import and export taxes that the Israeli government collects for the Palestinian Authority and gives to the Palestinian Authority. And the PA, the Palestinian Authority's budget, relies on this money. After October 7th, Smotrich, who is the finance minister of Israel, has refused to release these funds to the PA, putting the Palestinian government there at very real risk of economic collapse and, frankly, waving a flame of further instability near the tinderbox that is the West Bank under brutal Israeli occupation. In the last few days, President Biden personally has seen that he needs to get involved to negotiate this, to keep the Palestinian Authority as a viable alternative to Hamas, including a Biden-Netanyahu phone call. Now, while some Biden administration sources believe that Biden and Secretary of State Antony Blinken and others can keep pushing and ultimately get what they need from the Netanyahu administration, others say the tensions are building behind the scenes so much they believe President Biden is going to have to ultimately decide whether he has faith that the Netanyahu government, that this coalition government is one that he can ultimately do business with, not just for the current war, but for what is called the day after in Israel, what happens after the war is over. But while President Biden is focused on a Gaza free from both Hamas and IDF control, that is not what you hear from Israel's leaders. Ben-Gvir told his party this week that the war, quote, is an opportunity to develop a project to encourage Gaza's residents to emigrate to countries around the world. Again, what critics call ethnic cleansing. His response to the State Department criticizing him was to say Israel is, quote, not another star on the American flag, and he reiterated his desire for, quote, the migration of hundreds of thousands from Gaza, unquote. A Biden administration official said to me, at some point, Netanyahu is going to have to choose between governing in a way that pleases Ben-Gvir and Smotrich or governing in a way that pleases President Biden and the Biden administration. Though it is possible, of course, that Netanyahu has already chosen.